Testifying before Congress in March 2010, when the legality of drone attacks was in question, Peter W. Singer emphasized the rapid evolving use of robotics by the military and the CIA, and the challenges these technologies may bring, despite their obvious benefits. I caught up with Singer, an expert on 21st century defense issues who writes about robotics and war, to get the current story.
So again, thanks so much for your time. To begin, since you testified before Congress, how has the government's perception of drone warfare changed, and how do we justify strikes on 6 countries now?
We're basically seeing a technology at a turning point. I think the best parallels for talking about unmanned systems, robotics today is a couple of ones. The Air Force describes it, it's at a turning point equivalent to, say, 1918 with the airplane. We're using these systems more and more, but we're just now figuring out how to use them, where to use them, where they're headed to next, some of the new legal and ethical concerns that are coming out of them. So back in 1918, it was, hold it, we can use these things for bombing. That raises a lot of deep questions, not only on the tactics of war, but what does it mean to bomb a city? What's righteous? What's legal? We're seeing the same sort of thing applying to unmanned systems today.
Right. So could you speak a little bit more to what the advantages and disadvantages are of drones?
Robotics are particularly used for jobs that are viewed as dull, dirty, or dangerous. The real one that has political weight is dangerous. Being able to send a system out and not having to worry about its pilot being killed or taken prisoner. That is both a positive. We've had, for example, thousands of soldiers' lives saved by robotics that, for example, have been able to find roadside bombs, or we've been able to carry out, well over 200 airstrike missions into places like Pakistan and not have to worry about a human pilot, an American, being killed or captured. Now, the flip side of this advantage is that some worry that it's changing the decision-making that goes into war, that if you don't have to worry about some of these issues, you may be lowering the cost of war and not contemplating the decision to go to war with the same level of seriousness. Indeed, it may be even changing the definition of war. We could see this in 2 recent examples. In Pakistan, again, we've carried out more than 200 airstrikes there. By any past measure, this is the equivalent of a war. Or we see the current debate between the president and Congress right now over the Libya operations. And one of the things that the president said was, this is not a war. One of his reasons was because we're not sending some pilots into harm's way in the missions that are most dangerous. We're just sending Predator-class systems. So it's changing the context of how we talk about war, maybe even the definition of war itself.
Right. And you kind of preceded one of my other questions, but it seems so confusing, mainly with who is responsible for most of the strikes. There's a more overt operation from the military, but then there's a more covert plan from the CIA. How does those 2 kind of different campaigns impact overall our use of drones, but also then how the public gets their information?
Exactly. We are talking about the same technology, but a wide set of users of it. And some raise different and arguably more difficult questions than others. So in my mind, as an example, the military uses of this technology in places like Afghanistan is far less problematic than, say, the CIA's use of it in places like Pakistan or Yemen or Somalia. And really it comes down to a question not so much of the technology itself, but the people behind it, the rules and structures behind it. So military use of it means that it falls within a established chain of command. You have established legal codes. Now, we can argue about are the rules always followed or the like, but the point is there's a transparency there. By comparison, when you've got civilian intelligence agencies that are supposed to be operating covertly, it means they're responding to very different pressures. The people deciding the legality, the rules of engagement questions are not military JAG officers who spent their entire career training for this. They're civilian general counsels at that agency. It means they have a very different training package. Unlike the overt military way of dealing it, when you're talking about a covert operation, we don't even acknowledge that the missions themselves have happened, let alone if and when they go awry. And so it's just far more problematic.
Yeah, it's pretty pretty complicated. Leaves you with a lot of questions.
Yeah, none of this is simple. I mean, people want to, sort of, right and wrong, yes or no, use them or don't use them. I mean, it's a lot like that parallel of the computer back in 1980. It's like saying, are computers good or bad? No. What are some of the issues of using computers? I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
And so, obviously, computers have become integral to society. So, do you see the parallel continuing? And, what's the future of warfare as briefly as possible? Drones are going to continue to be used?
At the start of this, in 2003, we were using a handful of them. Today, we've got over 7,000 in the U.S. military inventory alone. We've got 44 other nations beside the U.S. using them.
Do you think that'll open up for more kind of pseudo wars, like we have things going on in Yemen and Somalia?
I think that's clearly where we're headed for counterterrorism missions in the future. And that is both an aspect of the technology itself, but also a reaction by the American body politic. We're seeing a very different style of responding to the threat of terrorism in failed states. It's using proxies and using airstrikes, particularly from unmanned systems. That seems to be the new mode.
Well, you've left us much food for thought. Thanks so much again for your time. For War News Radio, I'm Elliana Bisgaard-Church.